Helion IX was a world of shining towers, floating gardens, and crystal rivers that glowed like starlight. For thousands of years, its people, the Helions, believed they had mastered peace. They built libraries instead of armies, meditation halls instead of barracks. Many travelers once said, Helion IX felt like a dream given the shape of a planet. But now, that dream was ending. The Voracreon tide had arrived. At first, the Helions thought it was only a rumor carried by frightened merchants. Then it became a shadow appearing on border sensors. Then it became a black cloud in the night sky. When it finally reached Helion 9, it came like a storm that did not know how to stop. The tide was not an army. It was not a species. It was a force, an endless mass of living machines and hungry organisms, all connected by a single purpose: consume. Their bodies were grown from stolen genetic material, twisted into new shapes at terrifying speed. They crawled, flew, slithered, screamed, and devoured everything that lived. Entire cities vanished in minutes. Helion IX had never known war, and now it was drowning in one. In the capital city of Lumestra, the sky was completely dark, not from clouds, but from smoke. Fires burned everywhere. The floating gardens were gone, pulled down into the streets by the weight of the tide's creatures. Even the crystal rivers ran black now. Inside the great council hall, the few remaining leaders gathered around a dim holographic map. Every district flashing red. Every defense tower offline. Every escape route cut off. Counselor Senari, her golden skin smeared with dust, looked around the room with hollow eyes. We have lost the Western continent. The tide reached the core cities 3 hours ago. Counselor Rawless shook his head. We tried to create a shield dome. The tide broke through it. They broke through a planetary shield? Another counselor whispered, horrified. Yes, Rawless answered, as if it was made of paper. Silence fell. They all knew what was coming next. The tide never left survivors. Senari turned toward an old device resting on a pedestal at the center of the hall. It was a beacon, one that had not been used in centuries. It was meant for deep space emergency signals, and old texts warned it should only be activated when everything else had failed. Is everyone agreed? She asked quietly. We send the plea? What hope is there? Rawless asked, his voice shaking. No empire will come. They will not risk their fleets for us. That is true, Senari said softly. But we must try. Perhaps some wandering faction will hear us. Perhaps a mercenary company. Perhaps a forgotten power asleep between the stars. Anything. A younger counselor stepped forward. Even if someone does hear us, they may not be strong enough. Then at least we will die knowing we tried. With a trembling hand, Senari activated the beacon. A pulse of golden light shot upward through the shattered roof and into the smoke-filled sky. It spread across space, carrying a simple message. We beg for aid. Our world is falling. We will offer anything. Please help us. The beacon repeated the message again and again, broadcasting it to the farthest stars. The counselors waited. Hours passed. No answer came. Outside, the screams grew louder. The tide approached the council hall. Across the galaxy, great civilizations received the signal then dismissed it. The Thalkor Dominion considered Helion IX too far from their borders. The Drask Empire ignored it entirely. They said the Helions were weak, and this was the price of weakness. The Orath Consortium viewed the tide as an unprofitable conflict. Even the noble Velari Union refused, saying their fleets were already stretched thin. All of them heard the plea. None of them came, but the beacon did not stop traveling. It reached smaller worlds, lonely outposts, independent clusters, and finally, it reached a tiny planet on the Orion Spur, Earth. At the United Terran Command Station, orbiting above Earth, a young communications officer named Nolan Reyes noticed an unusual signal blinking across his console. He frowned and leaned closer. Commander, he called out, I think you should see this. Commander Yara Mbeki approached, her dark eyes scanning the translation screen. As she read the Helion's plea, she felt a heaviness settle in her chest. How recent is this? Hours old, Nolan replied. Their planet is still fighting. Yara tapped her fingers against her thigh. Earth was not an old power in the galaxy. Humans had only been part of interstellar society for a short time. Many alien races still looked down on them. Fragile bodies, short lifespans, primitive instincts. But humans had one talent. The galaxy always underestimated. They were very, very good at fighting impossible battles. Yara uploaded the signal to the secure channels. Send this to High Command. Nolan hesitated. Do you think they'll help, ma'am? Yara gave a small, sharp smile. High Command? Probably not. Then her smile grew slightly wider. But someone else might, far beneath the command station. In a hidden hangar, accessible only through biometric locks and genetic checks, a quiet alarm echoed through a long steel corridor. It woke the Monster Division. The Monster Division was not its real name, of course. Officially, they were the Terran Special Threat Response Group 7, an elite unit created for threats that normal armies could not handle. But other soldiers called them monsters, half out of admiration, half out of fear. They were the strongest, fastest, most adaptive humans ever trained. Some had cybernetic limbs. Some had neural implants. Some were experts in nanite engineering, deep space combat, anti-swarm tactics, gravity manipulation, or psionic resistance. Each one had survived battles where survival was considered statistically impossible. When the alert sounded, the members of the division gathered in their briefing chamber. General Arya Calder stood at the front. She was a tall woman with gray streaks in her black hair, a sharp jawline, and eyes that always looked like they had already predicted the next 10 minutes of your life. She addressed her team. We received a distress call. A planet called Helion 9X is about to be eaten alive by something called the Voracreon Tide. Some soldiers exchanged glances. Calder continued. The other empires won't help them, but Earth will. And we've been chosen to lead the response. A heavy, excited energy filled the room. The Monster Division didn't fear danger, they lived for it. A massive soldier named Harlan Stone cracked his knuckles. What do these Voracreon things do? They consume everything, Calder said. They grow stronger the longer they feed. According to the data, they've already destroyed at least 12 worlds. A quiet whistle passed through the room. And we're going to stop them? Another soldier asked. Calder smiled a cold, dangerous smile. We're not going to stop them. We're going to break them. No one in the room doubted her. On Helion 9, night had fallen, but the sky was still bright with fire. Counselor Sonari stood atop the steps of the council hall, watching the last defense turrets burn out. The tide was close now. The ground itself trembled beneath the weight of the creatures. She closed her eyes. There had been no answer. They were alone. But then something changed. A new star appeared in the sky. No, not a star. A ship. Then another. Then many. A fleet. The Helion sensors lit up with unfamiliar human signatures. General Calder's voice echoed through their comm systems. Helion IX, this is the Terran Monster Division. We received your message. Hold your position. We're coming. Sonari felt tears rise in her eyes. Someone had answered, and they sounded terrifying. But in that moment, they were the most beautiful monsters she had ever heard. The sky above Helion 9 had been burning for days. The capital, Lumestra, was a city of ruin now. The floating gardens had crashed to the streets. The crystal rivers were polluted with ash. The once beautiful world had become a living nightmare. But as the last remnants of Helion 9's defenses crumbled, something new appeared in the sky. Something that made even the tide's monstrous creatures hesitate. A ship. At first, it was a small dot in the sky, barely noticeable against the backdrop of smoke and flame. Then it grew, its shape becoming clearer. A massive hull, dark and angular, cutting through the atmosphere like a blade. Behind it, more ships followed, smaller, faster, but just as deadly. The first ship dropped lower, its engines glowing red-hot as it slowed to a near hover. From its underside, a metal ramp lowered with a loud hiss. Sonari, still standing at the steps of the council hall, stared up in disbelief. The ground around her shook as the ships landed large enough to dwarf any Helion building. The noise was deafening, and the air grew thick with dust. Then the ramp opened fully, and from the darkened belly of the ship, they came. At first, the sight was so overwhelming that Sonari almost didn't realize she was witnessing history. The first figure to emerge was tall, at least 2 meters. She wore combat armor that glinted in the harsh light, the dark metal reflecting the firelit sky. She stepped down the ramp with the confidence of someone who had seen the end of worlds and still walked with purpose. Her short black hair was streaked with silver, and her eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the area as though she already knew what she would do next. She was human. And she wasn't alone. Behind her, dozens of soldiers followed. They were just as imposing, each one wearing specialized armor, helmets tucked under their arms, weapons holstered and ready. Some of them wore strange devices on their wrists. Others carried heavy gear on their backs. Sonari watched them march forward like a single unit. They moved with a frightening precision, their steps perfectly in sync, as if they were part of the same pulse. The first soldier, the leader, stopped just before Sonari, her eyes locking with the Helions. "You must be Counselor Sonari," the human said. Her voice was steady, almost calm, in the chaos. "I'm General Arya Calder, commander of the Terran Monster Division. You asked for help." Sonari struggled to form words. She had seen the devastation firsthand, had watched the helplessness of her people as the tide had torn through their defenses. But now, this woman, this human, radiated confidence. Confidence that didn't match the situation. Confidence that seemed to say, "We can handle this." "Yes, you came," Sonari said, her voice barely above a whisper. Calder nodded once. "We came. And we're going to make sure the tide learns that it picked the wrong planet to attack." Sonari felt a wave of disbelief wash over her. These humans, they weren't afraid. Not even the slightest hint of fear in their eyes. They didn't look like saviors from the stars. They looked like warriors. As General Calder spoke to her, the soldiers fanned out behind her, setting up equipment and scanners. A massive armored vehicle rolled up next to them, its treads cutting through the ruined streets. It was an imposing sight, like a tank mixed with a massive crawler drone. Calder turned to her. "You've lost a lot already. I'm sorry. But we don't have time for words. We need to get to the front lines. The tide is close. Very close." Sonari nodded quickly, still processing everything. She gestured toward the ruined city, the central district. "It's where they've concentrated their forces. But there's nothing left to fight with. The tide broke our defenses." "Don't worry about that," Calder replied with a grin. "That's what we're here for." She turned, and the first wave of soldiers followed her without hesitation. Sonari watched in stunned silence as they moved toward the heart of Lumestra, their movements fast and efficient. They weren't soldiers, not like the ones she had seen in her people's history books. They were something else, something new. The battle for Helion 9s began almost immediately. The tide had taken control of the western continent in less than a day. It was now pushing toward the capital, Lumestra. Like a storm, unstoppable and fierce. Its creatures, strange, multi-limbed horrors, crawled across the land in massive waves, consuming everything in their path. They fed on the cities, draining the life from the planet itself. But the human soldiers didn't hesitate. General Calder's team moved through the streets like ghosts. They were everywhere, taking down the tide's creatures with brutal efficiency. Sonari watched as one of the soldiers, his name was Harlan Stone, stood tall in the middle of a ruined plaza. He was holding a massive gun. But it was no ordinary firearm. The weapon hummed with a strange energy, crackling in the air. A group of tide creatures charged him, their claws outstretched, their mouths wide open, hungry for flesh. Harlan didn't flinch. He raised his weapon, aimed, and fired. A pulse of energy ripped through the air, blasting the creatures to pieces before they even had a chance to strike. Sonari's heart raced. She had never seen anything like it before. These humans, they were monsters in their own right, not in the way the tide were, driven only by hunger and destruction, but monsters in the sense that they were relentless, efficient, unstoppable. And as the hours passed, the humans showed no sign of slowing down. Calder, herself, had been leading from the front, directing operations with military precision. She had been everywhere, rallying the troops, providing orders, and coordinating efforts to repel the tide's forces. But what struck Scinari the most was how the humans worked together. There was no hesitation, no fear. They didn't waste time on words. They didn't panic. They just did what had to be done. It was a strange kind of war, one where mercy didn't exist, and every strike had a purpose. The human soldiers weren't here to negotiate with the tide. They were here to end it. By the time the second day came, the capital was alive with human soldiers, their presence spreading throughout the city. In the central plaza, a large group of soldiers stood in formation, staring at a massive screen that showed the status of the battlefield. Calder stood at the front, giving orders as the rest of her team worked around her. Scinari approached, her mind still reeling from what she had witnessed. "General," she called. We haven't lost?" Calder turned and smiled. A rare smile that spoke of something beyond just duty. "Not yet, Counselor. Not yet. But we're going to make sure that's never an option again." As the battle raged on, the tide of war was beginning to turn. The creatures of the tide were being pushed back, their movements slower, their hunger lessened, and for the first time in days, Scinari felt something she hadn't thought possible: hope. The ground shook as another wave of tide creatures approached, their enormous forms crashing through the remnants of Lumestra's outer walls. The city was still burning, but the humans were relentless. They would not stop. General Calder looked at her soldiers, her voice steady. "This is it. The tide is going to make one final push. We have to stop them now." The soldiers nodded, adjusting their gear and weapons. Scinari looked at the human leader. "What do we do?" Calder smiled. "We finish it. Together." And with that, the fight continued. The monsters these humans had come to save Helion IX. But now, they were the ones who would make sure the tide never returned. The tide of battle shifted like the turning of a great wheel. Helion IX had been caught in its grip, suffocating, desperate, but now, something had changed. The humans, the Terran Monster Division, had come. They had landed like thunder and fought like lightning. For the first time in days, the Helion defenders had a fighting chance. General Arya Calder stood in the midst of a war-torn plaza, her eyes scanning the smoke-choked horizon. The city of Lumestra was still burning, but the creatures of the Voracrian tide, those monstrous, hive-minded things, had stopped advancing. They had taken heavy losses, their numbers had thinned, their attacks less organized, and it was all thanks to the humans. But there was no time to relax. The final push was coming. "Report." Calder barked into her comm, her voice sharp and clear. A soldier appeared at her side, a younger woman with dark, short-cropped hair and sharp eyes. "General, we've breached their forward lines. The tide is reorganizing, but we've hit their biofusion core. They're not producing any more swarms." Calder nodded. "Good. Let's keep it that way. What's the status of the Helion defenses?" The soldier hesitated. "We've patched together what's left. A few of their energy cannons are functional, but they've lost their long-range comms." Calder's gaze hardened. The battle had already cost too many lives. If they didn't finish this now, all their hard work could be undone in a matter of hours. "We don't have hours," she muttered. "We've got minutes." She turned to the rest of her squad, her voice ringing out across the plaza. "All units, this is it. We push through to their nexus. If we destroy the core, we destroy the tide. No second chances. Move out." The soldiers around her responded with a unified battle cry. The humans were relentless in a way that no other species could understand. They had survived because they were willing to face the impossible. And even when the odds were stacked against them, they fought with a raw, undying will. The central plaza had once been a place of peace, a space for gathering, for celebration, for life. Now, it was a battleground. The streets were torn apart by explosions, and every building in sight had been shattered. The air was thick with the smell of burning metal and scorched earth. But amidst the chaos, the monster division moved like a well-oiled machine. Harlan Stone, the giant soldier with cybernetic arms, led the charge. His heavy footsteps echoed in the silence as he fired his pulse rifle, cutting down Voracreon creatures that tried to crawl up from the wreckage. His weapon hummed as it fired in bursts of bright blue energy, each shot finding its target with terrifying accuracy. Beside him, Captain Maya Dre, a sniper with eyes like hawks, perched on the edge of a broken building. She steadied her rifle, aimed, and fired. The sound was like thunder, but the result was a clean, surgical strike. A massive Voracreon creature, its insectoid body covered in chitinous armor, crumpled to the ground in a heap of blackened flesh. The soldiers didn't stop moving. Every step they took was a deliberate strike. Every breath they took was a battle cry. They weren't just fighting the tide, they were breaking it, piece by piece. "Move forward," Calder shouted as she led the charge into the heart of the city. "Stay on mission. We're not here to babysit." Sonari, who had been trailing behind the humans in awe, couldn't help but watch the way they worked. It was like watching a force of nature organized chaos. The human soldiers had come to end the tide, not merely to hold it back, and they were succeeding. The path to the core of the tide's strength wasn't easy. Every street was a minefield. Every corner was a potential ambush. The creatures of the tide had begun to fight back with desperation, crawling from the shadows and attacking in waves. But the humans weren't intimidated. They had been through worse. "Watch the skies," shouted Sergeant Rajiv Lee, a communications specialist who had been assigned to keep the team's systems running. "We've got flanking units." Okay. The air above them cracked as dozens of flying creatures dived toward them. Their wings beat with a terrifying force, their mouths opening wide to release streams of acid. They came in like a storm, but the humans were prepared. "Suppressing fire, now!" Calder yelled. Immediately, the soldiers opened fire. The sky lit up with the flashing of weapons as pulse shots and grenade blasts filled the air. The creatures fell, one by one, their bodies exploding in showers of viscera. But there were too many. The humans needed help. "I'll cover you," Calder shouted to Lee. "Get the comms back online." Lee nodded, sprinting toward a nearby console that had been set up earlier. Meanwhile, Calder turned her attention to the advancing creatures. Her own weapon, already raised, a massive creature, a Voracreon brute, charged directly at her. It was as large as a small building, its skin slick with black, oily substance. Its eyes burned with hunger, but Calder didn't hesitate. She launched herself into the air, flipping over the creature's wide maw. As she descended, she fired her weapon directly into the creature's brain. The impact sent it crashing to the ground, a pool of black goo spreading out beneath it. "That's how we do it," Calder muttered under her breath as she landed gracefully. Meanwhile, Lee had managed to get the comms back online. A voice crackled through the speakers, muffled and distant. "This is the last call. Can anyone hear us?" the voice said, desperate. "Helion IX is dying. Please, someone answer." Lee didn't hesitate. He sent a response. "This is Sergeant Rajiv Lee, Terran Monster Division. We've got you. Hold tight." The final stretch toward the core was brutal. The tide was more focused now, the creatures swarming in greater numbers, desperate to stop the humans from reaching their heart. But the monster division wasn't backing down. "General," shouted one of the soldiers, "we've located the core. It's buried beneath the eastern ruins. We're going to need explosives to breach it." Calder nodded. "Get the charges ready. We'll clear the area." She turned to Sonari, who had been running alongside them. "Counselor, we're almost there, but if you want to help your world, you need to trust us. Stay close and stay out of the way. We'll need every second we can get." Sonari's heart was pounding. The humans had already done so much, but the task wasn't finished yet. "I understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The ground beneath them trembled as another wave of creatures advanced. This time, they were bigger, heavier, more relentless. But the humans didn't flinch. They had their orders, and they had their target. Calder raised her hand. "Hold the line!" she shouted. The soldiers spread out, creating a defensive perimeter while others prepared the charges. Explosives were placed strategically around the core, designed to weaken it from every angle. A quiet tension filled the air as they waited for the final moments. Then, the countdown began. 5, 4, 3, the world shook. The explosion that followed was deafening. A massive burst of light and force erupted from the center of the city. The tide's core was gone. The creatures screamed, but it was too late. Without their heart, their will, they were nothing. The swarm began to fall apart. The bodies of the Voracreon began to collapse, turning to ash and dust. The battle was over. Calder and her team stood amidst the wreckage, their chests rising and falling in the aftermath. The city was still burning, but it was no longer under siege. The world was safe. Scenari stood beside Calder, her voice a whisper. "You did it. You really did it." Calder turned to face her. There was a faint smile on her lips, but her eyes remained sharp. "This is what we do. We don't just survive. We fight. And we win." And as the last of the tide fell, Scenari realized something. Humanity wasn't just a species. They were a force. And in the galaxy, that was something every empire should fear. Helion IX had been saved, but at a cost. The battle had raged for days, and the world had suffered. The once beautiful capital of Lumestra was now a charred shell, the ruins still smoking from the final fight. But the tyrants of the Voracreon tide were gone, and the creatures that had once overwhelmed the world were now mere ashes, scattered by the winds. But as the dust settled, the true significance of the event began to dawn on the Helion people. They had expected mercy. They had begged the stars for help, hoping for the arrival of a powerful, ancient civilization that would protect them. Instead, they had gotten the Terran Monster Division, a group of humans who had not only stopped the tide, but had annihilated it. And in doing so, they had changed the very nature of power in the galaxy. General Arya Calder stood on the ruins of the central plaza, her boots crunching on the debris. Her soldiers were busy clearing the remains of the battlefield. But Calder was not focused on that. Her mind was on the aftermath, on what would come next. Scenari, the Helion counselor, approached her, eyes wide with both awe and disbelief. "General, I don't know how to thank you. You've saved us." Calder nodded without saying anything, but her sharp eyes were focused on the horizon. "You'll find your way. Helion IX will rebuild. But we need to talk." Scenari blinked in confusion. "Talk? About what?" Calder met her gaze directly. "About your future. About humanity's future." The Helions had celebrated their victory, but they had also mourned. Thousands had died in the battle against the tide, and many more were injured. The capital city had been destroyed, and though reconstruction efforts had begun, the scars would remain for a long time. But there was something else in the air, something that couldn't be ignored. The humans had done what no other race in the galaxy had been able to do. They had killed the Voracreon tide, something that had destroyed entire civilizations in a matter of weeks. They had done it not with superior firepower or ancient technologies, but with sheer determination and strategy. Humanity had shown the galaxy something it had not seen before: resilience. And now, every empire across the stars would know that Earth was no longer just a quiet, distant planet. They had seen humanity's teeth, and they had learned to fear them. In the days following the victory, the Helion Council convened to discuss their future. The humans had kept their word, offering to help rebuild the planet. But Calder's warning still hung in the air. "We can help," Calder had said. "But there's something you need to understand about the universe. You're not the center of it. The galaxy is full of dangers, far worse than the Voracreon tide. And the only way you'll survive is if you stand strong." Scenari and the others had listened intently, understanding the gravity of Calder's words. The Helions had been pacifists, used to negotiating their way out of problems, but they had seen the monsters that walked among the humans, and they understood the truth. Humanity did not beg. Humanity fought, and they fought to win. Scinari approached Calder, a serious expression on her face. "You're saying we should align ourselves with Earth?" Calder didn't answer immediately. She was gazing out at the broken city, where soldiers and engineers were already working to rebuild. She turned to Scinari and gave her a pointed look. "If you want peace, you'll need to fight for it," Calder said. "The galaxy won't treat you like you're important. But you're important to me. The human race doesn't forget those who fight alongside us. You can either stand on your own, weak and vulnerable, or you can join us. The choice is yours." Scinari didn't need more convincing. The Helions had no army, no means to defend themselves from future threats. But the humans, the monsters, had just shown them what it meant to be strong. "Then we will stand with you," Scinari said, her voice firm. "We'll rebuild, but we'll do it with strength. Together." The weeks that followed were a blur of reconstruction. The people of Helion 9 worked tirelessly to restore their cities. But this time, they were not doing it alone. Human engineers, soldiers, and scientists helped them with advanced technology, tools, and strategies that the Helions had never even dreamed of. Calder and her team stayed in Lumestra, overseeing the restoration efforts and continuing their work. But there were other matters at hand, matters that involved more than just the rebuilding of a world. The galaxy was not a peaceful place. And after the events on Helion 9, it would never be the same. As the weeks passed, ambassadors from other worlds began arriving on Helion 9. At first, it was just a handful of diplomats from neighboring systems, but soon, representatives from more powerful, distant empires began arriving as well. They came with questions, with demands, and with offers of trade. But one thing was clear. They had all heard of Earth. They had heard of the monsters who had crushed the Voracreon tide, and they had come to negotiate. The Helions, who had once feared conflict, now found themselves at the center of a new galactic order, and General Calder, once a shadow in the background, had become a symbol of humanity's might. The monsters were no longer a myth or a joke. They were a reality, a force that had earned the respect and fear of every empire across the stars. As she sat in the council chambers of Lumestra, Calder listened to the ambassadors discuss trade routes and alliances. She had been silent until now, but when her turn came, her voice cut through the room like a blade. "Let me be clear," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Humanity isn't here to negotiate peace. We're here to enforce it. If you're willing to stand with us, we'll help you. If not, don't waste our time." The room fell silent, and just like that, the galaxy had changed. Months later, Helion IX was no longer the fragile world it had once been. The people had rebuilt, yes, but they had also transformed. No longer pacifists, they were now warriors in their own right. The Terran Monster Division had trained their soldiers, shared their knowledge, and forged an unbreakable bond between Earth and Helion 9. The two worlds were allies, now no longer weak, no longer afraid. As General Calder prepared to depart, Scinari stood with her on the steps of the capital. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the newly restored city. "You've changed us, General," Scinari said, her voice full of gratitude. "You've given us strength we never knew we had." Calder gave a small, rare smile. "You had it all along. You just needed to see it." As the ships lifted off, their engines roaring to life, Scinari looked up at the stars. For the first time in a long time, she felt no fear, no uncertainty. She knew that Helion 9 would thrive, that the galaxy would take notice, and no matter what came next, the galaxy would never again forget what had happened here. Humanity had shown its teeth, and now, the galaxy knew that when humanity came, the monsters arrived.